Hello there. I'm Dr. Terry James Gingrass, and this is Dr. G's ADHD Chat. We're the show that's trying to make the world safe for ADHD. And I am a clinical psychologist and neuropsychologist, and I'm in private practice, and half to three-quarters of my practice has got to do with ADHD. I do diagnosis and treatment for kids, families, marriages, adults, all that stuff, pretty much. Frankly, we're really busy right now, which is not a bad thing. It's not a good thing, but I've got close to 40 years of experience working with ADHD. And I also have a child who has ADHD. And when I started out in the parenting business with ADHD, we didn't know a lot about ADHD. We weren't even sure it existed, honestly. We thought, it's just one of those things that'll die out. Didn't realize that there, been over 200 years of medical literature supporting the notion that there is such a thing as ADHD, and didn't realize that it's been treated with medications, Ritalin specifically, since the 1930s. I learned a lot over time about ADHD, and frankly, when I was actively parenting, I had a hard time finding anybody who knew how to evaluate ADHD. In fact, honestly, I never did find anybody. And, I'm a psychologist. I'm in the community. I know the people where I live and so on. And I am, frankly, that was kind of a rough row, and sometimes because we weren't exactly sure what we were dealing with. We just knew it wasn't like the other kids that we had. We made a lot of mistakes. I know we did. And so one of the things I, spend a lot of time doing when I'm working with ADHD folks, especially the adults, is dealing with, basically their regrets. I already did a section on ADHD adults who were diagnosed late in life, who, were never diagnosed, never even considered to have, some kind of a neurologic condition, I guess would be the best way to put it. They just ambled along through life, making more mistakes than most, and frankly feeling worse about themselves than most people do. It's one of those things that happens with ADHD if it's not diagnosed and treated. That's part one. That's my regrets one, are the folks who were never evaluated at all and just grew up thinking there was something wrong with them, but not exactly sure what that something was. It's a cross to bear, I suppose you'd say. And when you would finally diagnose somebody who should have been diagnosed when they were 7 years old, you get a variety of responses. Not all of it joy and relief. I mean, there are some people who's like, oh, thank God, now I know what's been wrong all these years. But you get an equal number who are just angry that it took so long for anybody, or that nobody basically bothered to get them some treatment back in the days in school and so on, when it would have done the most good, when they would have had the option maybe to go to college, or maybe to get through college in a normal 4 years or so. Anyway, without having to put up with what was wrong and not really knowing what it was, and so on. So, there's a lot of anger, and frequently it's directed at parents for not getting them any kind of medical care back when they were kids, and that it was kind of obvious that there was something not quite right. Okay, and the other thing I get a lot of is depression, just being really sad, oh my God, I've wasted so many years, all the struggle, all the strife, all the jobs I lost, all the relationships I lost, all the, on and on. And that's also, it's sad and it's unnecessary. I mean, why should people have to go through life like that? Obviously, but that's one of the things that happens, is that people get anxious about it. And depressed. And the other thing is that a lot of times folks who have ADHD also have problems with anxiety, mostly because they're afraid they're going to mess up, they're going to make mistakes, and knowing, based on past history, that they probably are going to make mistakes. So it's a self-fulfilling, self-defeating sort of way of thinking about life and thinking about themselves and their position in life. Okay, but that's the folks who were never diagnosed at all. There's another huge group of adults who were diagnosed as kids, but somehow decided they were better off going on their own. Usually this happens when they became teenagers, and teenagers are characterized by a wonderful confidence that they can do anything they want to do, and definitely do everything that all the adults can do. And it's just that arrogance, if you will. We've all been through it. We all know what it's like. Adolescence is that time of life when the emotional development of your brain is almost complete, but the judgment part hasn't caught up yet. So fortunately, for most of us, make it to 22 or 23 to full maturity of the whole brain system. But frequently, I see people who were diagnosed as kids. Most of them were treated as kids, although sometimes the parents elected not to get them treated for reasons that totally escape me, I'm sorry to say. And then when they get to be adults, they're usually have had a number of, they have a spotty employment record, let's just say that. They have troubles keeping a job. They have troubles if they ever get promoted and advancing in the job, because they don't handle the boring routine parts about being managers. So they're capped, their salary abilities are stunted. So a lot of times they get sick of it, and they go to their doctor about getting some treatment back, and they typically are, referred to somebody like me who specializes in diagnosis. But the surprising number of the stories, well, surprising to me, I don't understand why, if you identified a problem and you've started a treatment for a problem, you'd let a teenager tell you that, we're not going to do that anymore. But surprising number of them, it was that way. They were identified when they were in elementary school, treated for some number of years, and then they hit high school, which is probably a major source of stress on their limited abilities to manage time, to manage multiple tasks, so on and so forth. They decide they want to stop. And the parents apparently go along with them and let them stop treatment. And who knows what happens, but usually it's nothing good. They manage to squeak out of high school if they're lucky, just barely. And if they're not so lucky, they don't manage to make it out of high school. And that has repercussions the rest of your life. So then they come in to see me, and they're in their 30s or so, and the boss just promoted them, and they can't handle the job, and so now they want to be back in treatment. That is Well, let's just say ADHD. You know, it's first of all, it's a lousy name. Okay, because it's not just an attention problem. Okay, we know that if you've worked with ADHDers or you've been around ADHDers or you have an ADHD kid, you know it's more than just attention. Okay, and you also, if you're paying attention, you know that a lot of the importance of getting it treated sometimes is de-emphasized. It's like, it's just attention, what the heck, they're not going to die from that kind of thing. Well, I'm not sure. I think it was Russell Barkley, but I could be wrong. And if you're not familiar with him, he's one of the foremost researchers in the whole field of ADHD, one of the foremost thinkers in terms of ADHD, and he comes from a family that has had problems secondary to ADHD. But he has opined, and I think I've got him as the person who said this, but he said ADHD is the single diagnosis that causes the most difficulties to individuals in their lives, between poor school performance, poor or vocational support performance, problems with relationships in general, problems with education and training, just pretty much every aspect of your life is affected by this, but yet it's treated like it's no big deal. And that clearly is not true if we look at it objectively. If we look at all the things that are happening to people with ADHD because they have ADHD, and because increasingly we're in a cubicle-dominated economy, shall I say, where you need to be able to sit in a cubicle and put pieces of paper from one side of the desk to the other. ADHDs are terrible at that. So the regret people are the folks who have stopped treatment in a fit of adolescent exuberance, if you will, and then when they're in their 30s, find out, whoa, I can't hack this without some help. And better late than never. But if you are the parent of a child who is close to adolescence or actively in adolescence, if you can at all help it, don't let them quit treatment, because they'll be seeing somebody like me in 15 years or so and have to get back into treatment. And it's the time from the time you are in high school till you're in your 30s is probably the time when your life decides what direction it's going in, what kind of career you're going to have, what kind of education you're going to have, what kind of relationships you're going to have. So it's really an important part of life, time of life. And as a person who keeps having to pick up after the 15-year hiatus from treatment, I tell you that it is frequently not pretty. And people frequently are having troubles that will last throughout their lives, even if they get back into treatment. Because life is not such that you can just compensate for everything and everything will get back to the way it would have been if you hadn't had your little detour. Not really true. I mean, as you get older, it's harder to do some things like get extra training and education. I mean, Lord knows it's easier than it used to be with all the internet colleges and such that we have going on. But it's so much easier if you just get it at the stage of life when you're supposed to get it, and not let yourself go off the rails, if you were, and then try to catch up. And maybe by the time you're 50, you'll be back where you would have been if you hadn't derailed your life. This sounds a little grim, and I don't really necessarily mean it to, but it is something you need to be aware of. So if your child is approaching adolescence, for God's sakes, make sure they stay in treatment. Okay, do everything you can to make sure that happens, because it's going to be a vital thing. And the most effective treatments, I say again and again, but the most effective treatments are medications. And there is not enough fish oil on the planet to make your ADHD child improve as much as being on the appropriate medication. We'll talk a little bit next time about medication. As a matter of fact, I'm going to make myself a little note to make sure I do that, because I see a lot of hysteria, if you will, about medicating ADHD, and we need to talk some more about that. Okay, so that's me for this week. I'm Dr. Terry James Gingras. I am a neuropsychologist in private practice. I'm the father of an ADHD child, and I do ADHD at least 50, if not 75% of my clinical time. And the other parts of that time, I'm probably reading about it, researching it, trying to learn more. Because there are fascinating amounts of research being done on ADHD and lots of new discoveries continually. And there are newer and newer medications coming out all the time as well. Okay, remember, this is Dr. G's ADHD Chat, and we are about making the world safe for ADHD. As remember, normal people don't change the world. So maybe your ADHD child is going to be the one who makes the world a better place, solves our power problems, solves our ecological problems, solves our political problems. Who knows? But let's keep encouraging him or her, and so they can be ready to take the reins if they need to. Okay, that's it for me. We'll catch you next time.